I woke up on a cold January morning in 2025 to find a bright orange envelope wedged beneath my windshield wiper, frozen stiff against the glass of my truck. The instant I saw that envelope, I knew the rest of my day was going downhill fast. I had been living in the Riverside Meadows community in Spokane, Washington for the past 3 years, and during that time I had learned one very clear lesson. Nothing good ever arrived in those orange HOA envelopes. My name is Ethan Lawson. I'm 42 years old, a civil engineer, and I work from home most days of the week. I bought this property for one specific reason. It sat on the edge of the development, right up against a narrow creek that eventually feeds into the Spokane River. The land also came with an old stone bridge crossing that creek, a leftover from when the area had been farmland back in the 1940s. The bridge sat fully on my property, but for decades the neighborhood had been using it as a shortcut. When I bought the house, the realtor casually mentioned it, joking about how nice it was that I'd be taking care of a community feature. At the time, I didn't think twice about it. I peeled the envelope off the windshield and headed back inside, my boots crunching through the 2 inches of snow that had fallen overnight. It wasn't anything serious, just a light layer that the forecast said would melt by afternoon. I poured myself a coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring out the window at the bridge. 3 neighbors were already crossing it, cutting through my yard to reach the main road instead of driving all the way around the subdivision. The letter inside the envelope was printed on official HOA letterhead, complete with that absurd logo they had paid for last year, something that looked like a sunburst smashed into a gear. The message itself was blunt and infuriating. Dear Mr. Lawson, it has come to the attention of the Riverside Meadows HOA board that you failed to remove snow from your driveway and walkways within the required 24-hour period as outlined in Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Community Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions. Snowfall began at approximately 11 p.m. on January 14th, and as of 11 a.m. on January 15th, snow remains visible on your property. You are hereby assessed a fine of $250, payable within 15 days to avoid additional penalties. Failure to comply with CCNR articles in the future may result in increased fines or legal action. Sincerely, Patricia Hendris, HOA President. I read it 3 times, my blood pressure climbing with every pass. The snow had fallen while I was asleep. It was barely 2 inches. I had planned to shovel after finishing my coffee, like any normal human being. But apparently Patricia Hendris had been out at 11 in the morning with a measuring tape and a checklist. Patricia was exactly what came to mind when someone said HOA President. She was 53, had short blonde hair styled into a stiff helmet that clearly required weekly salon visits, wore pastel cardigans year-round, and drove a spotless white Lexus SUV even in winter. She had moved into Riverside Meadows 4 years earlier and immediately ran for the HOA board, winning easily because no one else wanted the position. Within 6 months, she crowned herself president and had been making everyone miserable ever since. I called my neighbor Frank Morris, who lived 2 houses down. Frank was a retired firefighter who had been there since the subdivision was built 12 years earlier. Did you get one of those orange envelopes? I asked. Sure did, Frank said. Fine me for having my garbage cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours. I put them out Tuesday night for Wednesday pickup. Patricia drove by at 9 in the morning before the truck even came. Wants $150. This is insane, I said. She fined me $250 for not clearing 2 inches of snow within 24 hours. It hadn't even been 12 hours since it stopped snowing. Frank sighed. She's on a tear this month. I think she's padding the HOA fund for some pet project. Have you been going to the meetings? No, I admitted. I work late and honestly avoid them. You might want to start attending. She's pushing new rules nonstop. Last meeting she tried to force everyone to repaint their houses every 5 years in approved colors. It barely failed. After hanging up, I sat there seething. $250 for snow. It felt like outright theft. The HOA had turned into a racket, and Patricia was running it like her personal cash machine. I went outside and shoveled my driveway and walkway, moving slowly and doing a perfect job. As I worked, neighbors kept crossing the bridge. It was about 30 feet long, made of stone and timber, solid as a tank. I had reinforced it myself when I moved in, replacing rotten boards and adding support beams, not because I was required to, but because I didn't want anyone getting hurt. That bridge saved the North End residents nearly 10 minutes of driving time. As I finished, Patricia drove by, slowed her Lexus, rolled down the window and called out, "Good afternoon, Ethan. I see you got my letter." I leaned on my shovel. I did. And I think a $250 fine for 2 inches of snow is excessive. The rules are very clear, she said sweetly. 24 hours from the start of snowfall. We all agreed to that. I was asleep, I said. And it's January in Spokane. Then perhaps you should be more vigilant, she replied. Unshoveled snow hurts property values. She drove off before I could answer. Standing there with my shovel, something inside me shifted, not hot anger but cold focus. Patricia wanted to play rulebook games. Fine. I went inside, pulled up my deed, survey, and plat maps, and spent 2 hours reviewing everything. What I found was simple and powerful. The bridge was fully on my land. No easement. No right-of-way. People had just gotten used to using it. That night, I made dinner and formed a plan. I paid the fine. But I also stopped maintaining the bridge. The next morning, I stood looking at it, admiring the craftsmanship, feeling a twinge of guilt, until I remembered the orange envelope. I drafted a letter to the HOA board and the neighbors who used the bridge, politely explaining that effective February 1, 2025, I would no longer maintain it. Snow removal, repairs, upkeep, none of it. Use at your own risk. I delivered 30 copies by hand. Reactions were immediate. Some supported me. Others were furious. Patricia showed up at my door 3 days later, uninvited, demanding I reverse the decision. I calmly explained I was simply following the rules. February arrived and I followed through. I cleared everything required, except the bridge. Snow piled up untouched. Signs went up. Neighbors slipped, traffic backed up, commutes doubled. Phones rang non-stop. When the HOA meeting finally happened, the room was packed. Patricia blamed me. I stood up and reminded everyone that rules work both ways, and I was only following them to the letter. There was never any requirement for me to maintain it. For years, I had done so voluntarily, investing my own time, effort, and money to keep it safe and usable for everyone. But with the recent surge in HOA enforcement actions and fines, I had to reassess my priorities. I could not justify continuing to maintain a structure I was under no legal obligation to maintain while simultaneously risking fines over minor, technical HOA violations. The room immediately erupted into heated debate. Some residents supported my position, while others accused me of being spiteful. Patricia slammed her gavel repeatedly, trying to bring the meeting back under control. Someone suggested that the HOA could simply take over maintenance of the bridge. That would require an easement from Mr. Lawson, said Richard Torres, the HOA treasurer, and that would require his consent. Every head in the room turned toward me. I said I was open to discussing an easement, but only if it was a formal legal agreement, properly documented and recorded, with the HOA assuming full responsibility for liability and maintenance costs. Patricia's face flushed red. She called it blackmail. Calmly I corrected her. It wasn't blackmail. It was property law. She wanted strict enforcement of rules, and I was simply applying the same principle. From that point on, the meeting collapsed into chaos. Patricia tried to regain control, but tempers were already flaring. Some residents were angry with me, others with Patricia. The meeting ended without resolution, only a vague promise to revisit the issue later. As I was leaving, a man I barely knew approached me. His name was Gary and he lived on the north end of the neighborhood. He said his wife and he had talked it over and believed I was doing the right thing. He said Patricia had been abusing her power for years and that maybe this would finally force people to notice. I thanked him and told him I appreciated the support. In the weeks that followed, tensions escalated. Snow continued to fall. The bridge became increasingly impassable. Traffic congestion at the main entrance worsened, and complaints to the HOA poured in non-stop. But something else changed as well. Residents started paying attention to the HOA board in a way they never had before. Attendance at meetings increased. People began asking pointed questions about finances, enforcement priorities, and inconsistencies. It became clear that Patricia had enforced rules selectively. Homes owned by her friends rarely faced penalties, even when violations were obvious. Meanwhile, residents she disliked were fined relentlessly. Records revealed that over $40,000 in fines had been collected in a single year, mostly from just 15 households. At the same time, $20,000 had been spent on landscaping at the entrance using a company owned by Patricia's brother-in-law. The March HOA meeting was even more crowded than February's. Residents demanded accountability. Patricia attempted to deflect and control the narrative, but she was losing her grip. A motion was introduced to recall the entire board and hold new elections. It passed decisively. Throughout all of this, my bridge remained closed and snow-covered. I maintained my own driveway meticulously and followed every HOA rule without exception. I was determined to give Patricia no ammunition. In mid-March, she finally crossed a line. Obsessed with forcing me to reopen the bridge, she sent a letter demanding I resume maintenance or face a $500 daily fine for creating a public nuisance. I took the letter directly to an attorney named Michael Brennan, a specialist in property law and HOA disputes. He reviewed the letter, examined my property records, and smiled. He said she had absolutely no legal basis for her demand. The bridge was private property, and declining to maintain it did not constitute a nuisance. If anything, he said, the HOA was harassing me. I asked what to do next. Michael told me to let him handle it. He sent the HOA a meticulously crafted legal letter explaining why they had no authority over the bridge, citing statutes and case law, and warning that continued harassment would expose them to litigation. He demanded all enforcement actions against me cease immediately and that the prior fine be rescinded. The letter worked. Patricia stopped threatening me, though she never refunded the original $250 fine I had paid under protest. Michael advised that pursuing it further would cost more than it was worth. The important part was that she no longer had leverage over me. The HOA elections were held in April. Patricia ran again and lost badly. David Park, a retired accountant who had pushed for transparency and fairness, was elected president along with 3 new board members critical of Patricia's leadership. Their first action was a financial audit. What they uncovered was troubling. While Patricia had not outright stolen money, she had awarded contracts to friends and relatives without bidding and charged personal expenses to the HOA under questionable justifications. She had also weaponized enforcement against people she disliked. At a packed special meeting in May, the board confronted her with the evidence. She denied everything until presented with receipts and documentation. Then she broke down, resigned on the spot, and left in tears. The board referred the matter to the HOA attorney, who determined the conduct was unethical and violated bylaws but did not rise to criminal fraud. Civil action was pursued instead. The case dragged through summer and settled in August. Patricia agreed to repay $12,000 and permanently resign from HOA leadership. She also agreed to drop all claims against homeowners, including me. The bridge remained closed as seasons changed. By summer it was overgrown but structurally sound. In June, David Park visited me. We sat on my porch overlooking the bridge and creek. He apologized for everything that had happened and admitted the board should have intervened years earlier. He then asked if I would consider an easement. The board believed it would benefit the community if done properly and fairly. I told him I had conditions. First, enforcement policies must be clear and applied equally. Second, the HOA assumes all liability. Third, the HOA covers all maintenance. Fourth, any future attempt to fine me over minor issues would void the easement permanently. Fifth, the $250 fine would be refunded. David agreed these were reasonable and took them to the board. They approved all conditions. Michael drafted the easement, which was signed in July with a nominal $1 annual payment to validate the contract. The HOA adopted new enforcement rules, established appeals processes, required competitive bidding, and limited unilateral authority. In August, contractors refurbished the bridge and agreed to winter maintenance. It reopened in September. The neighborhood improved. Meetings stayed full. Budgets became transparent. Enforcement became fair. Patricia eventually sold her home and moved away. In December, Frank joined me for a beer as snow fell gently on the bridge, already plowed by the HOA. He said I could have just paid the fine. I agreed, but then nothing would have changed. Sometimes standing on principle matters. I watched neighbors cross the bridge, kids playing nearby, lights glowing in the evening. The experience taught me about community, fairness, and accountability. HOAs can serve neighborhoods well when run responsibly, but they become dangerous when controlled by unchecked authority, creating a crisis-forced change. By standing firm, I helped expose the truth and bring lasting improvement to the community. People like you understand better than most how vital it is to have fair rules that are applied consistently, and the HOA needs voices like yours. So I agreed. I joined the HOA board in May, stepping into a role left open when a board member moved out of state. It was a 2-year term and I committed fully to finishing it. Serving on the board was eye-opening. I learned how much effort it takes to run a community association properly. There were real problems that needed attention. Aging infrastructure, tight budgets, neighbor disputes, but I also saw how easily authority could be abused if no one was paying close attention. We worked deliberately to preserve the transparency and fairness that had been restored after Patricia was removed. We released detailed financial reports, held regular town halls where residents could ask questions and voice concerns, and formed committees for major decisions so no one person could control everything. The bridge became a symbol of that progress. It was maintained, heavily used, and appreciated by everyone. People often thanked me for allowing the easement, and I always reminded them that it belonged to the community now, not just to me. In June, a letter arrived from Patricia's attorney. She was suing the HOA for defamation, claiming the newspaper article and our public statements about her conduct had harmed her reputation and caused emotional distress. She was seeking $50,000. The board consulted our attorney, who reviewed the case and concluded our defense was strong. Everything we had said was true and supported by documentation, and truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Still, it meant more stress and more legal fees. The case went through discovery over the summer. Patricia's attorney demanded extensive records, which we provided. Our attorney deposed Patricia, and by all accounts it went poorly for her. When confronted with evidence of her misconduct, she grew defensive and evasive. In September, her attorney approached ours about settling. They proposed dropping the lawsuit if the HOA agreed not to pursue further action against her. Our attorney brought the offer to the board. He advised that while we would almost certainly win at trial, trials are expensive and time-consuming, and settlement would allow us to close the chapter completely. The board voted unanimously to accept. Patricia withdrew her lawsuit, and both sides signed a mutual release agreeing not to sue each other again. It was finally over. That fall in Spokane was beautiful. The leaves turned gold and red, and the air was crisp and clear. I spent long stretches standing on the bridge watching the creek flow beneath it. There was a calm to it that felt earned. Hannah and I got engaged in October, planning a small wedding the following summer in Riverside Meadows, with the reception at the clubhouse. It felt right to celebrate in the community that had come to mean so much to me. The November HOA meeting was memorable only because it was so uneventful. We discussed the upcoming budget, approved minor landscaping work, and reviewed a homeowner's request to add a deck. Everything was professional and calm. No drama, no conflict, no crisis. It was wonderful. In December, the neighborhood held its annual holiday party at the clubhouse, and attendance was the highest it had been in years. People were genuinely happy to be there. Children played while adults laughed and talked. Someone set up a photo booth, and families took pictures in front of a backdrop lit with garland and lights. I stood off to the side with a cup of punch when Frank joined me. He told me I had done good, that we all had. I replied that it took many people standing up and demanding better. Frank said that while that was true, I had started it. If I had paid the fine and kept my head down, we would still be under Patricia's control. I had taken a risk and it worked. He was right, even though I hadn't thought of it that way at the time. When I closed the bridge, I was just angry and tired of being pushed around. I wasn't thinking about reform or setting an example, only about fairness and principle. But that is often how change begins. One person reaches their limit and takes a stand. Sometimes it fails, but sometimes when the cause is just and others are ready, it creates momentum and forces action. The holidays passed, 2025 turned into 2026, and life in Riverside Meadows remained peaceful. The HOA functioned smoothly under David's leadership. The bridge stayed open and well-maintained. Property values rose not because of harsh rule enforcement, but because it was simply a good place to live. I continued serving on the board and found that I actually enjoyed it. There was satisfaction in solving problems, improving the community, and helping neighbors resolve disputes. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. Hannah and I married in June of 2026 as planned. The ceremony was at a small downtown Spokane church, and the reception was held at the Riverside Meadows clubhouse. Nearly the entire neighborhood attended. Even the bridge played a part. During our first dance, fairy lights hung on the bridge glowed through the clubhouse windows, a surprise arranged by our neighbors. Standing there with my wife, surrounded by friends in a community that had rebuilt itself, I felt deep gratitude for both the ending and the journey. The experience taught me something fundamental about community and democracy, even on the small scale of an HOA. Governance only works when people participate and hold leaders accountable. When people disengage, petty tyrants can take control. But when residents pay attention and demand fairness and transparency, systems can work beautifully. A few weeks after the wedding, I was gardening when a car pulled into my driveway. It took a moment to recognize the driver, but it was Patricia. She looked older, more tired. She approached and apologized, admitting she had been wrong and had let power go to her head. She said she was in therapy, trying to understand her behavior, and was working on herself in Arizona near her family. I accepted her apology and wished her well. After she left, I felt relief, not because the damage was undone, but because there was closure. Life moved on. The seasons changed. The bridge remained, a testament to cooperation and standing up for what is right. Every time I crossed it, I thought about that orange envelope and everything it set in motion. I wouldn't change a thing. The ordeal was stressful and exhausting, but it was empowering. It showed me that ordinary people have power when they choose to use it. The bridge was the catalyst, but the real change was in the people. We learned that rules should serve the community, not control it, and that fairness and transparency matter. On a snowy January morning in 2027, 2 years after that first envelope appeared, I watched the HOA plow clear the bridge while I drank my coffee. I went outside and shoveled my driveway not out of fear of a fine, but out of pride and responsibility. That was what mattered most. The bridge still stands, crossed daily by neighbors who rarely think about its history. That's how it should be. Good infrastructure and good governance work best when they fade into the background. But I remember the anger, the stand, and the lesson that sometimes the strongest response isn't aggression, but enforcing your own boundaries. That lesson carried into every part of my life. The bridge connects more than land. It connects people, principles, and the understanding that communities thrive when fairness, respect, and accountability guide them. That is the real story of the bridge, not revenge, but transformation.